our patron saint and his role in the conversion of Ireland from paganism to Christianity in Patrick, the Renegade saint.
The Patrick of legend is a sort of gunslinger of Irish Christianity.
Patrick, the 5th century bishop, was in modern day parlance a heretic.
Great that we have mavericks. We need to have those people who are sometimes off message.
It is true, the work, the evidence in their favour, and we know that there was politics involved.
They create this amazing edifice which has essentially convinced people for well over 1,000 years. That's good spin doctrine, in fairness.
The story of Ireland's conversion to Christianity has been told to us down through the centuries in a most dramatic tale about St. Patrick lighting a paschal fire on the hill of Slane in defiance of the pagan High King, going on a mission, baptizing the nation, and successfully turning the Irish into an Easter people.
What do you know about St. Patrick?
When I was a Celtic fan.
He went all over Ireland to Munster and to Connacht and Meath, and he was explaining all about God.
He used the 3 leaves on the Shamrock for one was God the Son, the next was God the Father, and the next was God the Holy Spirit.
I don't think he had a beard at all.
The Christian churches in Ireland claim a heritage that goes back to St. Patrick, a tradition about the apostle who brought Christianity to Ireland, established his church in Armagh, and who was buried in Downpatrick in County Down.
The man that we all commemorate, the man you see, as you say, dressed up with the mitre, holding the staff, striking the snakes and all that kind of thing, waving the shamrock, well, he has no more to do with Christianity in the 5th century than you or I. The Patrick that you're describing is the Patrick of legend.
But if he's not the man we've been told he was, does that not mean that the very foundations of Irish Christianity are on shaky ground?
And if the Patrick of legend is not the real St. Patrick, then who was? And how do we get to the truth about him?
The real Patrick, one might describe as Patrick with a capital P. He was a flesh and blood man who lived probably in the 5th century. But over the centuries afterwards, an image of him was developed with an agenda behind it, which one might describe as Patrick with a small p. And that's not really a man at all, that's a phenomenon.
The Patrick of legend is a sort of Clint Eastwood type figure, the gunslinger of Irish Christianity. This man steps out into the street and does battle with druids, and you know what's going to happen. The druid is sucked up into the air, dropped down on his head, and his head is broken, and everybody realizes you don't mess with Patrick. This is a dude you just don't knock around with.
In a way, the story of Patrick has become so embedded in our national consciousness that we all assume quite a lot about him. You know, you don't even have to be religious in any way to have some sort of notion of, yeah, there's the shamrock and there's a snake thing, and people die a river green. And, you know, so Patrick is become part of our sort of cultural heritage.
Whereas the Patrick of reality is totally different.
He probably was an outsider. He certainly was an outsider from his own church, the church in Britain. He was one-off in all sorts of ways, but I think that he was, in a funny way, a kind of spiritual genius.
St. Patrick wrote 2 works in Latin that actually survive to this day. He lived almost certainly in the 5th century in a Britain which had been in the Roman Empire and was just on the edge of that as it was beginning to break down. And he wrote these 2 works describing large parts of his life. And we define the real St. Patrick as the man who wrote those 2 Latin works.
Patrick's main writing is known as the Confessio. The other is a letter to the soldiers of Croagh. These are the only 2 texts that exist in the world that were written in Ireland in the 5th century.
These two writings by Patrick, they are our sole window into what was happening on the west coast of Britain and in Ireland at the time.
The 5th century is often regarded as a dark age of Irish history, a blank page, if you like. Patrick is our only real source, and therefore anything he says about anything at all is worth pondering and worth considering.
In the 5th century, Ireland was very much at the edge of the Roman world. That world was really changing quite a lot. When Christianity would have come into Ireland initially, there would have been very many different religious cults in existence. People would have believed very many different things, and Christianity would have probably just been one, probably quite minor cult among many.
Okay, put everything you think you know about St. Patrick to one side and park it there for a minute. To build up a picture of who the real St. Patrick was, we need to go back to the 5th century, to the man's writings, and they're found in the Book of Armagh.
When you look at the texts, the actual manuscripts of St. Patrick, it's his own writings, you do get to discover a character, an interesting 5th century fellow with a capital P, if you call him. Yeah. But he is different from the character that many Irish people were brought up with. And they're kind of shocked to know that this guy mightn't be the guy they thought he was.
I have encountered that reaction, yes. I have to say that having come from outside Ireland myself, the first Patrick I ever encountered was, if you like, the real one, and that was from studying his works when I was a student. So to me, the snakes and the Shamrock were things which I only discovered about later. And I found them less impressive, to tell you the truth, than the real Patrick, because the real Patrick comes through in his own writings in a very inspiring way. What we see here is the opening passage from the Book of Armagh of St. Patrick's own writing, his confessio or declaration. Ego patricios peccator rustiциssimus et minimus omnium fidelium et contemptibilis sum apud plurimus. That's his modest opening paragraph.
And what, I can understand the ego patricios bit. I am Patrick, is that what it means?
I am Patrick, yes, I am Patrick. A sinner. Ego patricios peccator rustiциssimus.
My name is Patrick. I am a sinner, a simple country person, and the least of all believers. I am looked down upon by many. At that time, I did not know the true God.
Patrick's writings actually tell us a lot about the real man. His name was Patrick. At 16, he was taken prisoner to Ireland, where he worked as a slave, tending sheep. After 6 years, he escaped and returned home. Then, one night, in a dream, he heard the voice of the Irish calling him to walk among them once more.
He came back to Ireland, and what he tells us is that one way and another he ended up converting and baptizing thousands of people and ordaining clergy for them, and that he preached the gospel to the point beyond which there was no one.
The 5th century Patrick had his reasons for writing the things he did. And it's only when we begin to examine those reasons that we discover some very interesting and even disturbing facts about the real Patrick, particularly from his confessio.
It was composed very much as an expression of his faith. His idea of who God was, how he discovered God in his life.
And the document is written in response to criticisms that are being levelled at him from the British Church and from enemies that he has in Britain.
He was at odds with other members of the church, put it that way, particularly people who were his, if you like, his bosses, his authorities, and he certainly had trouble with them.
There were apparently people who found fault with him for a variety of reasons.
The criticism seemed to be of two types. One is related to his status as a bishop. And that's probably the main criticism, and it's certainly the thing that Patrick comes back to again and again.
One time I was put to the test by some superiors of mine. They came and put my sins against my hard work as a bishop.
The other criticism is related to this perception that seems to be gaining traction in Britain, which is that he's in Ireland for financial gain, that he's on the take in some way.
Suggestions that there might have been fiddling the books, that there might have been something to do with the finances. There's a suggestion that he might have been doing things in places where he shouldn't have been, that he had no business, for example, risking life and limb, taking the word of God to places, as he said, where no man went before. We think of Star Trek as the place where that statement came from. But Patrick actually says he has been preaching in places where no man went before. And that's a hazardous occupation in the 5th century. You're going to get yourself killed. And in fact, Patrick more than once was on the point of being killed. He tells you that quite explicitly. He was taken prisoner, clapped in chains, threatened. All kinds of things happened.
There were many who forbade this mission. They even told stories among themselves behind my back, and they said, "Why does he put himself in danger among hostile people who do not know God?"
Patrick spends a lot of time talking about how, as a missionary in Ireland, he has to, resist the temptations and the snares of the flesh and so on. And he very much presents this image of himself as somebody who, while he may have been nominally Christian, didn't live a Christian life until he found God in Ireland. When he's writing his document, he's not writing for us. He's writing to respond to these criticisms, and he responds in the main way he responds is really through defending his own character, which is why it's such a personal document, and we get a lot of insights into him.
Although I am imperfect in many ways, I want my brothers and relations to know what I'm really like, so that they can see what it is that inspires my life.
It's a very severe test of any of us to have to give an account of ourselves at that sort of deep level. We're fortunate in that he, and again, it was a raw experience for him because he was deeply hurt actually while he was writing this thing. But like a lot of hurt people, that's when the truth, the real truth came out, warts and all, so to speak.
So, the 5th century Patrick was a bit of a dark horse. He was defending himself against allegations by his superiors who'd undermined his authority as a bishop. They'd questioned his good name and reputation and even challenged him about his use of money. Then, that 5th century Patrick vanishes off the face of the earth. And 200 years later, when the church in Ireland has grown and is establishing itself, Patrick turns up again.
By the 7th century, the need to create a history for the Irish Church is now a pressing need. How will the Irish Church go about building its history? Well, it needs someone who makes a reference to pagans. There's only one reference to that, and that's Patrick. So Patrick becomes the ideal figure upon which the foundations of the Irish Church can be laid. It's not a church that came with traders in wine or dogs or cattle or with slaves. It comes with this apostolic mandate, a voice from heaven. The Patrick of Christian tradition is very largely the creation of one of the most brilliant theologians, historical minds that Ireland has ever produced, Murrochú, who wrote a life of Patrick at the end of the 7th century. And Murrochú has to create a very many-layered Patrick. Every church needs to have a single apostolic figure so that it can arrange its hierarchy around that figure. For Murrochú, Patrick supplies that need. He needed someone who was in the past. He knows there is the memory of Patrick is still around, And Patrick has left a couple of writings. So here is someone he can latch onto. Here is someone who talks about Ireland at a time when it's being converted from being not a people to being the people of God. And he builds the ideal patron saint out of these materials. He had very few bricks, but he built a magnificent theological edifice.
Murrochu's biography of Patrick is found in the Book of Armagh, a collection of various texts that together make up the earliest history of the Irish Church. The Book of Armagh also has the oldest copy of Patrick's Confessio.
Even though it's the oldest copy, and even though it comes from Armagh, which ought to have been the repository of the original, actually, we can demonstrate that there are significant portions of the text that have been removed. We know this because through pure happenstance, very early on, certainly in the mid-7th century, somebody took Patrick's writings to the continent. By virtue of the fact that Patrick's writings survived there, modern scholars have been able to compare the Book of Armagh version with the other copies, and they very quickly realize that the other copies are complete and the Book of Armagh version is faulty. It's been tampered with. Scholars are now convinced that the gaps were actually deliberate, and the gaps are precisely those parts of the text in which Patrick reveals himself at his most vulnerable, his most human.
The Patrick he produces is a most complex and rich figure. There are few churches in Western Europe that have such a perfect pedigree created for them as Murrochu does for the Irish Church in the Patrick figure that he creates.
As a storyteller, you can't do better than Murrochu. As a historian, he's garbage. As a biographer, in our sense, he's pitiful. He's worse than pitiful, because what he does with Patrick is a travesty.
When Murrochu read Patrick's writings, there were parts that embarrassed him, and he very carefully avoided them. And they are the exact same bits that today, when I read them, I say, that's why he had to explain himself.
They brought up against me after 30 years something I had already confessed before I was a deacon. I referred to some things I had done one day, rather in 1 hour, when I was young, before I overcame my weakness.
So you're left with the idea that by 700 at least, Armagh has manufactured a totally new Patrick.
It is true that the work, the evidence in their favour, they weren't concerned with clinical history. They were concerned to build up a credible character that would claim, if you like, patronage.
But they've invented this character that the churches today hold on to. They've invented this tradition that's not based on reality, that's untrue. Some of the historians are saying it's a lie that's been perpetuated by the churches up to the present day.
Oh, not at all, not at all. It's not a lie. It's based soundly on the confession.
It's an edited version of Patrick and the Confession. They've edited it just to make a character to fit a patron saint characteristics.
Yes, but if you go to the confession as it is, you still have a credible character.
But the writers of the Book of Armagh take that credible but flawed character of the Confessions and create another Patrick, turning him into a unifying father figure for the Irish Church. And to do that, they have to edit and embellish Patrick's own writings. But there's also something else going on.
Probably around the mid-7th century, the Church of Armagh set in train a serious campaign to lay claim, I suppose we would say, to Patrick as the founder of the Church of Armagh.
If you want to think of Ireland in the 7th century, you don't think in terms of high kings and organisation. Think in terms of Somalia today or Afghanistan. It's warring tribes. The Enale are the people with the most Kalashnikovs.
The Church of Armagh became the dominant church because it was sponsored and promoted by the dominant race or tribe of the day, who were the Enale tribe of the north. Now, these were very vigorous and very aggressive people, and they promoted Armagh and Patrick for all they were worth.
part of Murroch's agenda is to try and establish, to put it very simply, the rule of law. But not only do they want to create law, they have to create a myth of order. And so the Patrick story functions to create a myth of a single people, a single family, and they have a single ruler, the Aeneil, and a single religious ruler, Patrick and his successor.
And beginning is connected with firstness, with primacy. The see of Armagh is the primordial see because it is the see of Saint Patrick.
If you cast your mind back to 1979, the famous occasion in Drogheda, where Pope John Paul said Patrick was the founder of Armagh, therefore Armagh is the centre of the Irish Church. The words were supplied, as it were, the script was given to him, as it happens by Cardinal Tommaso Fiach, who was then the Cardinal Archbishop of Armagh at the time. And he did it with a purpose. The idea was to cement, to sort of set the coping stone on the argument which had been going on for 1,000 years, whereby Armagh claimed to be the head of the church because Armagh claimed it had been founded by Patrick. Now, if you read Patrick, if they stand back and look at the facts, if they look at the documents and analyse them, and then on that basis there is no connection between Patrick and Armagh. Put at its most blunt, you would have to say that the Patrick of Armagh is a pack of lies, almost certainly a deliberate pack of lies.
The Archbishop of Armagh is primate of all Ireland today because he is successor of Saint Patrick, the first bishop of Armagh.
Lies. Downright lies. They know it's lies. Cardinal Fee should have known it was lies. It's not true. Patrick was never Archbishop of Armagh.
Yes, I would accept that in a little sense, that there wasn't any Archbishop of Armagh or Archbishop of anywhere else in Ireland until the 12th century. And it's as simple as that. It was the 12th century, the reforms of the 12th century that set up the diocesan structure in Ireland.
I suppose you'd sort of say it's about as solid as quicksand would be solid in a way. People say something for long enough, and it's believed for long enough that it almost becomes true for people.
Like the Catholic Church in Armagh, the Church of Ireland on the other hill claims a direct line of succession back to St. Patrick. The Church of Ireland Archbishop Alan Harper worked as an archaeologist on the cathedral site before ever becoming Primate of all Ireland.
I understand the revisionist view that the whole of the association with Armagh is a figment of the imagination of Murroch and the rest. You know, they were the Max Cliffords of their day. But I don't think that they could have built such an edifice on nothing. It seems to me it's worthwhile taking seriously the reality or the possibility of this having been a significant focus for the work of Patrick. Even if what was added to it, the embroidery that was added to it, was for a completely different purpose, which might have been to do with establishing Armagh as the premier see in Ireland. But it seems to me that it would be very hard to demonstrate that there is absolutely no relationship with Patrick and this city.
If you say to somebody, well, you know, there's no real historical evidence for there being an early connection between Patrick and Armagh, that does come as a huge surprise. In the 7th century, the Armagh writers do an absolutely amazing job of taking lots of, you know, very disparate material, traditions that don't necessarily favour their church, and they create this amazing edifice out of it, which has essentially convinced people for well over 1,000 years. I mean, that's good spin doctoring, in fairness.
But by manufacturing this Patrick figure and claiming he founded his church in Armagh, the so-called spin doctors created a major problem for themselves, a problem they could only solve by calling on a higher authority.
In the 7th century, it was seemingly accepted pretty much everywhere that Patrick was buried in Downpatrick and not in Armagh. Now, in the context of the early church, it is highly remarkable that the relics of a saint or the body of a saint wouldn't be at his primary church.
That is fatal. It should have been fatal to any campaign to establish Armagh as the centre of the Irish church. Because the Irish had the belief, it's expressed in the term, a nice term, fód bháis, the sod of your death. And the sod of your death is the sod above your grave, under which you were buried, because that is where you will rise again on the day of the resurrection.
Now, the Armagh writers do go to very convoluted lengths to explain this. I mean, they say that Patrick was on his way to die in Armagh. God said, no, you have to die in Downpatrick instead, not given any real reason, of course. And then Patrick is like, well, no, I really do want to die in Armagh. And God says, no, it has to be Downpatrick. But if you die in Downpatrick instead of Armagh, the head of the church in Armagh will be the head of the church in Ireland forever, basically. So they try to turn it into a positive, basically. But, you know, it's clearly they're just flying by the seat of their pants.
What are we to make of all this? The churches today acknowledge the spin, but claim it has a solid basis in tradition. The historians flatly contradict that. And to make matters worse, one theologian believes that Patrick's writings, the words he uses and the way he uses them, paint a far more disturbing picture of our patron saint.
Patrick, the 5th century bishop, was in modern day parlance a heretic. There are two telltale statements in Patrick's own writings which show that he was off message. The first is that he says, I baptize people, that's what you'd expect. Can ordain clergy, that's what you expect. And I prepared a people. He believes the world is going to end very soon. In fact, he believes that when he has preached his message, there is nothing to stop the second coming of Christ. This is a man more like Jim Jones in Jonestown and would be a modern example of the same phenomenon.
The end is nigh and it's all going to go up in flames and we all go together when we go. That obviously induces a certain degree of trauma if you're only to think of 2000. The end of the millennium, everybody thought planes were going to fall out of the sky.
5th century Patrick makes sense in the 5th century, but people in the 5th century were not like us at all. Christians do live with this fear of a final judgment happening in their lifetime. What sets Patrick a little bit apart, though, is he believes that the final judgment will come about when the gospel is preached to what he calls the ends of the earth, and he believes that Ireland is the end of the earth, so that once he finishes preaching the gospel in Ireland, that this will clear the table and allow the second coming to happen.
If someone believes that the second coming is very soon, and they believe that they're going to be among the last preachers on earth, and then says, well, there's now nothing to hold up the second coming, and then he says he is consummating a people, this ain't normal Christianity in the 4th century or the 5th century or the 21st century. This is off message.
And when you say he's off message, what message is he off?
Standard Christian belief is that the end will come, there will be the return of the Christ, but it's in an indefinite future, way off, it's beyond history. He thinks it's going to happen soon.
Great that we have mavericks. We need to have those people who are sometimes off message, because to be on message is often simply to be parroting the party line. That's a good thing in itself. What's a heretic? It's somebody who gets something wrong at some stage doctrinally. Okay, let's accept that that's a possibility. Doesn't invalidate his mission. makes him a slightly more interesting person.
It's a bit of a joke, you know, people were getting all upset about who's a heretic and who isn't, when you consider that huge areas of the population are moving away from any kind of faith of any kind, you know, and whether somebody has heretical tendencies or not is quite incidental. Not, I mean, important in the sense of, you know, we need a central authority, say, for instance, except the Pope and except the Church. But even to say that is to admit that I'm quite liable to divert, as everybody else is, and that's all I'm saying. And if Patrick did that, so what? The main thing is that his main line is quite acceptable and quite authentic, and that's enough for me.
Not everyone agrees that the 5th century Patrick was a heretic.
When Patrick says he's going to convert the Irish in anticipation of the end, he's really not saying anything that Augustine wasn't saying, or any of the great...
So he's orthodox?
Perfectly orthodox.
There's absolutely no...
And there's certainly no whiff anywhere in Patrick's writings that he is trying to refute an accusation of heresy.
I think in terms of doctrine, Patrick is actually very orthodox. Now, he could be seen as being on an extreme end of it in the sense that he very much personally believes that the end of the world is nigh, and maybe some people didn't. But in terms of his actual religious beliefs, you know, they're actually quite standard 5th century beliefs. They're not that unusual.
So at the end of it all, what are we to believe? Who are we to believe? Well, I suppose if Irish Christians want to understand their heritage and their foundation story, how they became an Easter people, they really need to know how that flawed 5th century Patrick became the patron saint of Ireland. Now, what that does to their faith remains to be seen.
It is dangerous, or at least seems to me it is ill-advised, to assume that the only history that's authentic is that which is written. The oral tradition, which is very conservative in itself, the oral tradition needs to be given an appropriate place as well. Not on the assumption that everything that it says is absolutely accurate, nor on the assumption that everything that it says is absolutely inaccurate, that it's a figment of somebody's imagination, but that there is contained within a conservative oral tradition a good deal that is really true.
It's very hard to undo 1,000 years of tradition. If you stand on the street and tell people Patrick didn't use the Shamrock, Patrick didn't banish the snakes, they'll probably smile benignly at you and pass on and continue to believe these things. Why wouldn't they?
Do I take what I've been taught by my family and their generations over some historian that I know nothing about? No, not at all, not at all.
The scholars are, by definition, pushing out the boundaries. They're always looking for new angles on things, new insights. And like theologians are the same. That's their job. And fair dues to them. And they're right to come up with their new ideas and their new insights. But that does not alter basics. And I'm a kind of simple-minded person who lives in the field of, you know, of just reaching out to ordinary people with something that I think is so important that it's too important to be left simply to the forensic people.
There is a view among the church people that you can't leave St. Patrick to the historians.
Of course there is. That's the only way they can perpetuate the lie. The idea that fact or truth would enter into it is, you know, it's anti-theological. It runs counter to the Christian message. Faith is the reason why you are a Christian. It's not rational conviction.
I don't believe that,
yes, it is. Well, if it were, then you couldn't stand by Patrick. You couldn't stand by Patrick and Armagh. It is such a demonstrable pack of lies.
I don't know what it means to merit something. But if Patrick himself was responsible for bringing Christianity here, if he was responsible, as he himself says, for the conversion of many people and for the ordination of many priests, if he was responsible for establishing a mission here which achieved the things that he said it achieved, then that is a worthy thing to record. And if you want to call him a saint, I'm happy to call him a saint.
Christians also believe that the truth will set you free. And when you confront the difference between legend and history and can separate the two, you can somehow be freed from being a victim of history and being a prisoner of the past. And as a Christian, I would say, it allows you to see more clearly what it's really important to believe.
But can you hold your head up high and have pride in St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, if the man was in fact a heretic?
Well, you don't hold your head up high and have pride in the patron saint of Ireland. You're proud that there's a tradition of Christianity, and you're proud that the legend of Patrick is a very good myth.
So you've got this real 5th century figure, somebody who is quite flawed, is controversial, and then you get this sort of superhero DC Comics type figure who emerges in sort of the 7th century and then becomes celebrated. Now, one thing I think it does show people is that you should always go back to the original documents. You know, as much as possible, don't just listen to what a tradition tells you. Just because something is a tradition doesn't mean it's right.
The bottom line, though, is you do think that the Patrick of the writings of the 5th century guy does have the credentials to be a patron saint of Ireland?
Oh, absolutely. I have no difficulty at all with that. I would regard him as such myself, although I'm not a Christian. I wouldn't be a professing Christian. But anybody who reads St. Patrick has to come away with the idea that this is a quite remarkable man. He happens to be a Christian, and therefore of special importance for Christians, but even for non-Christians. Patrick is a remarkable individual. You could say, if you don't want to say he is the patron saint of the Irish Church, that's to say if you're not a believer or an adherent to a Christian religion, then you can say that he is the first man in Irish history. That's not a bad claim to make.
Hail glory St. Patrick, dear saint of our Isle.
Faith is a more complex matter than historical evidence.
So you're not worried about that? You're not going to help people pick up the pieces. You just tell them what you think, what you believe the history tells you. But the rest of us have to pick up the pieces.
What people have to do is make sense of Christian faith. And then they can look at what was important when Murrochú taught that story. Murrochú says they must realize that they are a baptized people. They must have the vision of the Easter Vigil as their vision of Christian faith. He says they must see Christian faith as being a sort of as Moses led the people into a new world, Christian faith must lead them into a new world. They must overcome their divisions on this island. And Christianity is a religion that's supposed to be a religion of peacemakers. These are all things that Murrochú was terribly interested in preaching. This is what faith is about, not whether Patrick built a church here or on some other hill.
Earlier on, you talked about the church needing to have and to create this monster, this magical, extraordinary superhero, in order to bring about some kind of national cohesion. There is some validity in wanting to do that, actually. And I think there is some validity in wanting to make Patrick into a unifying figure in the 21st century. If that means stripping away a good deal of the embellishment and some of the sectarianism, goodness me, perhaps some of the racism that has applied to Patrick in the past, I'm glad to see it go. Within that tradition that we're all discussing, there is somebody that galvanized a nation, whether at the hands of a Max Clifford or as a direct result of his own magnetic personality and his own drive, I don't know, but there's somebody there.
Next week, Would You Believe meets Brian Hannon, former Bishop of Clogher who ministered to his people during the worst days of the Troubles and now in his retirement faces his own battle with Alzheimer's disease. That's next Sunday at 10:35 and takes us to the week in politics at 11:05. Stay with us tonight here on One. Masks are removed and vanities laid bare in a revealing portrait of nudes. Naked is after the break.
He was the Guinness heir, she was a society beauty, and they lived in the Phoenix Park in Farmley.
It was like Downton Abbey. Farmley was much better.
She was the #1 businessman's wife in Ireland.
He had already been made the chairman of Guinness at the tender age of 26.
A unique insight into the brewing family as the late Miranda Guinness made one last visit home. Return to Farmley, Tuesday at 10:15 on RTE1.
Oh, if your lawn is a farce, weeds are right pain in the grass. Simply shake the sound and in a week, cheer up evergreen, makes lawns lush and green.
Now until Easter Monday, every floor reduced up to 50% off. Every carpet, every laminate, every vinyl, and every rug. Quality floors to suit every budget. Directly available from stock. But hurry, don't miss out. Offer ends Easter Monday. Whatever floor you are looking for, the first step is Carpet Right.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I'm doing a trial for Oral-B Pro Expert toothpaste. I'm a bit sceptical. I've just brushed, my mouth's feeling incredibly clean. I'll test again in the morning.
Oral-B Pro Expert. Unlike ordinary toothpaste, it protects all these areas dentists check most, even at night.
Okay, I've just woken up. I don't know if you can hear this, but my teeth are squeaking clean. I love it.
Oral-B Pro Expert. Brushing is believing.
Anyone can win at the Ladbrokes Irish Grand National. But wouldn't you prefer it was you? The Ladbrokes Irish Grand National, April 9th at Ferryhouse. It really is anyone's race.
This week at Dunnes Stores, we have some fantastic offers. Selected fresh Irish meats like mince beef 550 gram, chicken fillets 2-pack and pork chops 4-pack, any two for an amazing €6. And our spring wine sale is now on with over 200 wines up to half price. Hurry, sale ends Tuesday. Dunnes Stores, always better value.
Soon, the best place in the world for him will be in your arms. To help you prepare, get your free baby welcome pack by registering now at pampers.ie.
Delicious My Wadi Double Concentrate makes twice as much, to give you at least 40 glasses from every 1 litre bottle. So you save with every serve.
Thanks, Mum. It's not your waddy. It's my waddy.
How about making your Wadi for the whole country and winning a trip to Disneyland Paris? Create the winning My Wadi flavour online and find it in shops this summer. Create your own My Wadi. Go online now.
It's simple. Like my morning shower. Like my moisturiser. Like my fresh pair of knickers.